Hi, I'm Marlon Palmer, and this is COM 218, Public Speaking for the IT Professional, Week 5. In Week 5, we were tasked with a 10-minute persuasive video on pre-assigned topics or a particular topic of our choosing. I chose to use one of the pre-assigned topics, and the topic I chose to speak on this week is educational merits of video games. One might look around and one might say to themselves, educational video games? How do those two things go together? Well, I'll say this here. Video games, as we know, are fun, but most people don't realize they can have an educational merit to them as well. Why? Well, let's start with the kids. Most kids play video games for hours and hours at a time and don't even realize the time that they spent playing these video games. So, if you put educational type video game in their hands, such as a Trivial type pursuit game, a scavenger hunt game, or I'll say a game such as Jeopardy or even Wheel of Fortune, a game where they have to answer questions and they get some kind of educational merit, just questions that might have world geography or whatever the case may be. In my case, I'm going to even say sporting games because I use that for my kids, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So there's three things that I say that go hand in hand with the educational merits of video games. The first being reaction time. Kids that play video game tend to have a better reaction time. Secondly, they also have a better hand-to-eye coordination, and it can also help them with their self-esteem over time. You might say self-esteem in video games? How can video games help a kid with self-esteem? Well, let's just take a kid that ordinarily doesn't do too well in school or anything in particular. You get them to play video games, and they get to complete levels and seeing how they can complete games and actually learn it. That can help them with their self-esteem. Second major point is this here. Video games can actually be used for a good research tool. Most kids that play Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune, or I would say even Family Feud, as an example, they don't really look at that as an educational opportunity. They just look at it as fun. So as a parent or scholar, having the kids play these different video games can help them research information to stuff they normally wouldn't have any interest in. And then lastly, the different levels that the kids have to compete in. One wouldn't think that a kid, competing and completing different levels could actually help them. Well, what this does is to help kids learn how to set goals, and when they fail at something, not necessarily stop at that failure point. Just imagine a kid playing a video game and they fail the first time. Do kids normally stop playing that video game? Or do they continue playing that video game until they can complete that level? And even if they played it for hours and end on end over time, and they have to come back to it tomorrow, they're usually going to keep playing that video game until they finish that level. So, like I said, it allows kids a chance to set goals and realistically try to achieve and accomplish those goals. Well, I'll give you a few examples here. Some of my supporting material here I'll speak on is personal experience, examples, and personal testimonies of why I personally feel that video games have educational merit. And I will speak on the actual topic of sports. I would speak on like geography or history, something like that, but sports is near and dear to me in my heart, and it's actually helped me and my kids learn over the years with video games. So just one example in particular. majority of my kids started playing sports at 5 years of age. And my son, he played football at 5, and he really couldn't understand the logic of the game. He would get out there, and we would give him plays, and we would tell him the different things he needed to do. And sometimes he might get it, and sometimes he couldn't understand what we were trying to explain to him. So one day I sat back and I thought about it. I said, you know what? I grew up playing video games, and one of the ways that I learned a lot about sports was actually through the different plays and things on the video games. So I decided to test this theory out one time. So I brought my son in, and at the time I had my PlayStation, and we put in the Madden video game, and some of the plays that I was trying to explain to him at 5 years old, he couldn't really understand it. But he could play the Madden video game. So what I did was I would sit him down, and as we would go through a different play or something that we tried to explain to him on the football field, I would pause the game and I would explain it to him. I'll say, see what you just did here? This is exactly what I was trying to get you to do on the football field. So as we went through the game and played, and I stopped and paused and would basically explain it to him, he was able to kind of understand it better because the way we were explaining to him on the field didn't directly correlate to how he was seeing it on the video game. Once I went through this with him on the video game, when he got back to the practice field and to the game, he understood the plays a little bit better, and he was actually able to apply the knowledge that he learned from sitting down watching and playing the video games with me. So I use it as an educational point to teach him sports. Case in point, my daughter's the same way. I put a basketball in their hand at the age of 5. I was trying to explain defense to them. They really couldn't understand what I meant when I was trying to explain defense to them. So I took the basketball game out, and I just said, hey, they love video games. And what I did is when I would play zone and I tried to explain that to him, I would pause the game and I would say, look, you see the screen? You see this 2-3 zone here? This is where you're supposed to be. Watch the players as they move around throughout the game here. And throughout the game, I would pause it, or if I would change to a man-to-man defense, or if I would change, the offense up, or whatever I decide to run, pick and rolls or different things like that. To a kid at 5 years old or 6, and sometimes even 10 years old, they don't really understand the logic behind why we're telling them what to do. Well, I can stop the play and I can show them that, look, when I set a pick here, see how this person moves on the video game, and it stands here and blocks that person and allows me to run around that person and get closer to the basket to either pass it off or be able to shoot the ball. So being able to show them this during the video game was instrumental to them actually being able to adapt and learn these fundamentals a little bit quicker than most of their peers. I can say it helped my kids because over time my kids actually became very, very good athletes, and they were actually more excelled at athletics than kids at their own age. And most of the parents would ask me, they would say, well, hey, how does your kids understand this stuff? How did they know the logic behind this pick and roll? Or as far as my son, how did he know this football play or this or that? What I would tell them is this. I said, hey, I pulled my video game out and I explained to them. I showed them this is how I did it. And from time to time, I would bring other kids in and I would show them as well. And this is how we end up having pretty good football teams year over year. And I can say from experience, some of the other parents start using some of the same techniques that I use to help their kids become better at sports as well. So, in conclusion, I'll say this here. Video games do provide, hours of fun, but they can have an educational merit, to your average kid. And if you have a child that's out there that has a hard time focusing on either studies or learning sports like what I illustrated, video games is a very good area to help individuals learn how to adapt. So I'll say this here and end it. I challenge the audience here to further look into the educational merits of video games and see if your kid or someone you know can actually benefit from using video games. Thank you for your time.